campaign. We have assisting me, my regulars for this part of the day and this part of the week. First, Amy Ridenhour, president of the National Center for Public Policy Research. She's also author of the highly acclaimed book entitled Shattered Lies. If you want a free copy, go to their website, visit nationalcenter.org, visit nationalcenter.org. Amy, good to have you back.
Glad to be with you.
On board as well, another old friend. We missed him on the first lap, but we got him on this one. Bob Weiner, Robert Weiner, otherwise known, a Democratic strategist, columnist, former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey, and former chief of staff for the House Committee on Aging. Bob, good to have you back.
It's a pleasure, Alan, and I'm so sorry that we missed the first segment. I did try calling your 888 number, but I've also just coming right off meetings on the Hill on some of these very subjects that we're talking about today.
Well, Bob, let me ask what you think about this latest development. I mean, we knew it was coming. It's not a complete surprise. The only surprise is in the aggregate. I mean, I think most folks would have believed that the president really would have tried to engineer these court hearings to pretty much occur after the general election, not before. He had an opportunity to go for a full vote of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals and bank, if you will. The appellate court had ruled against Affordable Care Act, believing that the individual mandate was indeed unconstitutional, as 26 states of the country have so sued the government over. However, what we're looking at now is a whole different animal, because the president, I guess, decided that if you went for a full vote from the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, he might not have liked the results, which would have made it that much more of an uphill battle. So he had to go to the Supreme Court and ask them to review this. Isn't it fair to say that he really would have preferred the review to be after the election and not right smack dab in the middle of it, Bob Weiner?
Well, I've thought it was weird from the beginning that the administration requested an expedited Supreme Court ruling, and the administration, as I wrote in my Palm Beach Post op-ed, Alan, it seems oddly confident that the court will take its side on the mandate and the rest of the law. Don't bet the farm. This is a 5-4 court. I predicted in my op-ed that they will vote against them, and the best that this administration can come up with is that the rest of the bill, which people are enjoying, to allow coverage without pre-existing conditions. 1 million kids are now on their parents' insurance who weren't before the bill, blocking lifetime benefit caps, expanding coverage to 15 million. The best that we can hope for is that the court allows the rest of the bill to survive. I would be
Bob. I think a lot of folks would Bob. I think a lot of folks would respond by saying what you're referencing are those things on which most of the GOP would be fine.
Well, they
those
say
areas,
that, but they never voted
in those
for it,
areas,
in
those areas are not really where you're going to have problematic entrenchment. That's not where you're going to find it. Where you find it is when the reasonable is used as grounds to justify the unreasonable. Amy Ridenhour, what am I missing?
Well, you have that right. It's true. Meaning conservatives, actively did not like this bill and pretty much everything in it. But other Republican-run Congresses have expanded the federal role in health care over and over and over again. So it's how you sell it. But getting back to the U.S. Supreme Court, it's going to be a very interesting decision, whatever they do. One of the things that I hardly hear anybody say is that a lot more is at stake here than the health care bill, even though that itself is huge. What they will be debating and resolving, presumably, is the future of the interpretation for possibly decades to come of the Commerce Clause. Commerce Clause goes one way or another. You can radically affect the ability of the federal government to regulate things. Now, my hope is that they will overturn some past decisions and reduce the federal impact. They could very well go the other way, as Lawrence Silberman, an otherwise conservative judge, did recently, about 2 weeks ago. So a lot of things will ride on this, not just the health care bill. Personally, and I'll shut up for a minute, I'd like to see some changes to the Constitution, meaning a constitutional amendment, so that we don't have to go through this in the future. We can limit what the Commerce Clause says by rephrasing it or adding to it so future Supreme Courts and
but you see, Amy, here's the problem, and I'll go to Bob with this one. Here's the problem with that. The Democrats essentially still embrace the living document theory, which essentially says that according to Marbury versus Madison, 1803, that the Supreme Court has the right to interpret the Constitution when determining whether or not challenged legislative law indeed passes constitutional muster. Now, that's judicial review. And judicial review makes sense because to a large extent there's plenty of times when the Constitution just doesn't have corresponding language to deal with a particular question in focus. So for better or for worse, we understand that the Supreme Court will interpret the Constitution in those instances, and we accept their rulings. Maybe we don't like them, but they rise and fall based on that. And it makes sense, again, to a large extent, because with judicial review, you're just saying, hey, again, plenty of times where the words in the Constitution just really don't have any corresponding application to the particular challenge in focus. However, when the Constitution does provide direct wording, and the Supreme Court would disregard our Constitution on point, well, that's when I think it's committed a hostile act against the American people. And to you, Bob, that's the problem with the living document theory. The living document theory believes that there is no end to the Supreme Court's right to judicial review, that it could essentially look at something in the Constitution that's very direct in its wording and still, in the name of interpretation, change the impact that is supposed to be realized by that written document. And some folks are concerned that the Supreme Court may very well do that in this instance. What's your read on this, Bob Weiner?
Well, my read is Alan, I wish it were true that the Supreme Court saw limits, but they don't. That's why the word supreme is in there. And by the way, you have to pick apart what Amy said. She said some Republicans are reasonable, but this Congress opposed all of the bill, including from Boehner on down, including CHIP and the pre-existing conditions.
Yeah, I said that.
And a sixth of the economy and over 50% of all bankruptcies are because of health care. Over half of home foreclosures are because of health care. So that's what this bill has tried to do.
Predicated on what?
Hopefully the court will allow it.
Predicated on what? Bob, how can half be predicated on health care when other reports are showing a preponderance of other factors driving the current meltdown in our housing industry? I don't. Where? How does one all of a sudden replace the rest?
For their houses is quite another, and people moving out of their houses and losing their houses is because of the expenses of health care. Bankruptcies are, as I said, over 50% of all bankruptcies. You can Google it. You can look at the census statistics. You can look at the health.
Bob, what about Bob? Those are justifications for coming. Bob, those are justifications for coming up with a better health care plan. They're not justifications for violating the Constitution.
So we have one in hand, and they want to kill it.
Not a justification for violating the Constitution. These two things are not mutually exclusive. By the way, quick, Amy, aside for you, we have to acknowledge something else here, though. George W. Bush had both chambers of Congress for 6 of his 8 years. And they didn't bother moving the ball up the field as they're now insisting they want to. I am really fed up with that. They're right now always talking about how the best approach is to sell insurance across state lines, and I agree with it. My problem is, where the hell were they about that idea when Bush had the mantle? Amy, right now.
This is what Bush did, and I profoundly disagreed with it, but he certainly did it. He thought the best thing to do in health care was to give a drug benefit to Medicare beneficiaries. I didn't like it, but he spent billions of dollars expanding health care. It just goes to show how you can never sell out enough to make the liberals happy, because you can spend billions, and they'll turn around and say, oh, you didn't do anything at all.
Quite the argument.
Actually, Bob, you know what? Your team, if you will, your camp, is rather divided on this. Half like to continuously beat up on the GOP for coming up with a health care plan that they say was never paid for. The other half says, you know what? Including you, I believe. You like the prescription drug benefit, and you have given kudos to the Republicans in that regard, yes?
The Democrats gave 160 tax break amendments to the Republicans to get the bill passed. They still wouldn't vote for it. So, this bit of you can compromise with everybody as much as you want.
But you did agree with the Republicans when it came to the prescription drug plan, right, Bob? You did agree with the prescription drug plan.
75% of the American people now support the prescription drug plan.
So you did like it.
And you do as well.
I absolutely.
You do as well. But half the Democrats don't. And guess what? It came under budget by $200 million.